Okay, it looks like we are live all over the place. Hello, everybody that is tuning in. Cue up the comments here so I can see them. This is Sonia and Dr. Lisa, who I'll introduce you to momentarily, coming to you live from Minnesota and California. We're so excited to be here. So if you guys are jumping on live, please do say hello. Let us know where you're watching from because we're streaming live all over the place. So we'd love to hear where you are watching from. You're going to hear a lot of great information today. And then if you're catching this on the replay, we'd love to come back and say hello to you as well. So drop a replay down in the comments. So we're just going to give it a moment here. It looks like people are starting to jump on. Hello, everybody. Hello. Happy Thursday. Oh my gosh, I am so excited about this topic today because it's something that hits near and dear to my heart. And so we're going to get into some really deep stuff about the gut. You guys have heard me talking a lot about the gut, and it's probably the most important part of your body. Well, at least one of them. So you're going to hear today from an expert in the world of SIBO, and we'll talk a little bit about what SIBO is, and she'll talk to you, of course, a little bit more about how to identify whether you have it, and we'll just kind of get into the weeds a little bit about super detailed information made simple related to your gut. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started because I know people are probably going to catch this on the replay as well, but I want to give a proper introduction to Dr. Lisa. She is a naturopath, a chiropractor, and an applied clinical nutritionist. That's a lot of credentials, but she's really amazing when it comes to functional medicine and gut health. And so as a registered dietitian, nutritionist, and certified diabetes educator, of course, our worlds kind of came together working on some projects. And I just thought it would be so great to be able to learn from her expertise and to share it with our audience here so that you can really learn and become more informed about something called SIBO, otherwise known as small intestinal bacteria overgrowth. Just try to say that 10 times fast. So Dr. Lisa has 20 years of experience working in the functional medicine space. She's an amazing human, and she's really the expert as it relates to gut health. As a matter of fact, when I went through some gut things recently, I won't get too detailed on you, she was the first person I reached out to, and I said, help, I have this awful diagnosis of SIBO. Can you please help me navigate this really rough water? And so I'm really excited for you to meet Dr. Lisa today because I think you're going to learn a lot from her. So Dr. Lisa, I would love for you just to kind of elaborate a little bit, tell everyone a little bit more about your background, how you got here, and how you became so passionate about gut health.
Okay, sure. I think, going back even before I started my education, I was always really interested in supplements, diet, food, all of that, and the healing capacity that it all has when you get the synergistic mix right. Even I remember, as a child, I would get vitamins in my Easter basket. I loved things like that. So it's been a bit of a lifelong passion. And then, going through school, graduating, starting private practice and whatnot. I was in private practice for quite a long time. And I had a very dear friend who had just tremendous gut issues. And all these different people, and she wasn't getting any help at all. And finally, something clicked for me. And I thought, my goodness, I knew this is a small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And we got her on a particular diet. We dialed that in for her, and we got her on some supplements, and she had really great improvement. It was written up in a national magazine, her case was, and she said, you need to build a website and get this information out there because there are thousands of people. And this was probably like 6 or 7 years ago, I'm guessing. And even back then, there were people online searching for information on how to deal with this because SIBO wasn't really like the big popular thing back then. Now there's a ton of information out there. So I put the website up and, just to give people content and that's something that they could relate to. And so that they had the understanding that someone else understood what they were going through. And that's kind of how I always say SIBO chose me. I didn't choose it. It just kind of evolved into that. And then I've obviously expanded out into really a lot about gut health, because like you said, it's so important. Gut health is so key to all other aspects of the body.
Oh my goodness. Wow. I always wondered, and I don't think I ever asked you how you got so involved in this, because for me, my passion was because it happened to me, right? A lot of times you become very passionate about something because it smacks you in the face like a ton of bricks, like Epstein-Barr. That hit me out of nowhere. And I probably would never have spent all this time learning so much about it had it not happened to me, right? So that's very interesting. So we've got some people watching that probably have no idea what SIBO, or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, is and why we should be informed about it. Would you elaborate a little bit more on what SIBO is?
Yes. Okay. So everybody knows that we have a lot of good gut flora. I'm sure your listeners are very well versed in gut flora, but the majority of that lives in our colon. Upstream from the colon, we have 20 feet of small intestine. And the small intestine should have some bacteria, gut flora, in there as well. It's everywhere. It's in your mouth. It's in your eyeballs. It's everywhere. But the amount of gut flora in the small intestine should be relatively low compared to that which is in the colon. And what happens through a series of events, I usually relate it to the perfect storm, is that the bacteria in the small intestine start to multiply and overgrow. So this causes a tremendous amount of bloating, especially when people eat, plant fibers, starches, sugar, and they'll go to their doctor and they get scoped, endoscopy, colonoscopy. They can't find anything wrong, and they have nowhere to go. They get labeled as IBS. And there's a huge overlap between SIBO and IBS. That's, been very well documented. But there is this component when there's this overgrowth of bacteria in the small intestine, we are learning more about what to do about that, how to get that a little bit calmed down and, rebalanced, and get the patients feeling better. But these patients, the SIBO patients really go through a lot. It really can take over your life. So if you have a lot of bloating, abdominal distension, and I'm going to add either constipation or diarrhea, you may want to look into whether you're dealing with SIBO.
And that was me. Not to give you guys TMI here, but I think transparency is so very important. So the way I understand it, there's a pretty big correlation with immune problems or Epstein-Barr and perhaps an episode of SIBO sometime in your life. So understanding where I came from in my diagnosis of Epstein-Barr, in some research that I did based on symptoms I was having, I said, you know what, I probably need to look into this. And lo and behold, I had a test done and it came back like off the chart positive. And I felt like, oh my goodness, here I am doing all these really healthy things for my body. You can't help but look yourself in the mirror and go, what did I do wrong?
Right.
And so, how is it that, when people think that they're doing healthy things, right? They're eating all these plant-based foods and healthy foods. How does something like this occur?
So it is just different for everyone. What I can tell you is that in the medical research, there has been a huge connection to an episode of food poisoning. So oftentimes that can start off an episode of SIBO. And the connection there is that as your body is dealing with the food poisoning, which is bad bacteria in the gut, and it's attacking it and trying to get it under control, it can also start attacking part of the gut itself. And, we can get into all the details maybe another time of that because that's a whole story in and of itself. But what ends up happening is the motility slows down in the gut. So if you eat food, it goes into your stomach, it mixes with some juices, and it dumps into the small intestine, where it goes through these 20 feet of winding intestinal movements, and the food is moving along, right? It's moving through the small intestine. But when that process slows down, whatever's in there, whatever bacteria is in there, whether it's appropriate bacteria or inappropriate bacteria, it can start to grow. So one of the things I tell my patients is, you want to keep your digestion and your movement through the intestines flowing like a river. So what happens when you have a swamp is things start to grow, right? If you've ever seen a swamp, it's dirty, it's murky, there's scum on the top of the water. And it's that same kind of, I give patients that visual so that they can think about their small intestine that way, where we want to keep it moving and flowing like a river as opposed to stagnating like a swamp, right? So a big piece, whether you've had a food poisoning attack that has slowed the motility or not, because other things can slow the motility, but a big piece with SIBO is that the motility, the food moving through the small intestine, has slowed down. So we always want to, address that if that is part of the picture. Other things, there are so many things. Obviously, many patients have not had any kind of food poisoning that preceded it. But stress, I've had many patients tell me, well, I went through this really stressful period, or I had this and this and this and this happen, and my stress level was through the chart or off the chart, and that initiated all these gut symptoms. All of a sudden, I was bloated all the time. I was having diarrhea, or I was having constipation. I was having all these issues. So stress is another piece to the puzzle, let's just say.
Well, and that's like, unfortunately, especially right now, 3/4 of the world, right?
Exactly.
So really, it sounds like the moral of the story is, if you've got symptoms like gas, bloating, discomfort, things that just don't feel right, and you're being diagnosed or told it's IBS, I mean, don't just stop there. Investigate, further. Have some testing done, which is what I did. So I went through a hydrogen breath test. So would you elaborate a little bit more on how you diagnose SIBO, how you find it?
Yes. Okay. So we have conventional, and then we have a little bit more alternative. So conventional and alternative, there's, it's used widely these days. There's something called a breath test. So just to give you the concept here, you eat food. We're not talking about the test quite yet. We're talking about regular everyday. You eat food. If there's excess bacteria in the small intestine, that food begins to ferment. That fermentation process, if you've ever fermented food, or anything bubbly or fizzy, right? When you're, can you think of something like
kombucha?
Great example. It's a little carbonated. Well, it's bubbly. It's producing a gas. That gas is coming off of the bacteria in your small intestine. Well, that gas gets picked up by your bloodstream, carried to your lungs, and you exhale the gases. That when you're using a breath test, what you will do is blow into little tubes or some kind of a contraption where they can measure the different gases that are being exhaled through the lungs. Those get measured and charted. And so if I guess what would happen with the test is you would do a baseline where you'd blow into a tube. That would be your baseline. Then you would, instead of eating, you would drink something, usually glucose or lactulose, and that would be the food for the bacteria in the small intestine. And then you chart it every 15 to 20 minutes. You'll blow into the tube again and measure those gases. And if we start to see certain gases elevating on the chart, we would assume that that is because there's fermentation happening or there's gas being produced in the small intestine by the bacteria themselves. That
Very
makes sense.
interesting. It does, which explains why I sat down and I did this test, and I literally was blowing through a straw, I think every 15 minutes for 2 hours.
Yes.
It was a little like watching paint dry on a wall, like, because you really couldn't get up and do anything because you had 15 minutes until you had to take the next test.
And you can't do anything. So
no,
I haven't done the test myself, but I can only imagine.
It's miserable. Okay, so you get this dreaded diagnosis. Many people, you and I were talking about it's not like a disease, right? So tell me a little bit about what happens when you get the diagnosis.
Okay. Well, first of all, I like to tell people that it's really not even a primary condition. So this is really important to me to stress to my patients that it is not an infection. We have a tendency to think that bacteria is bad and we have to kill it, and it's the bad guy. So we tend to think, oh, well, how do I get rid of this bacteria? I need to kill it. I need to kill it. And if we think back to when we were young and we used to probably all get sore throats and earaches, and we would go to the doctor and they'd say, you have strep throat, here's some penicillin, here's some amoxicillin, and in 5 days it's gone, the infection's over with, and you're back to normal. SIBO isn't like that. Unfortunately, it's much longer a process. Now, conventional medicine will use antibiotics. They are very costly, and they have varying degrees of outcome. Some patients do very well. They can do 2 rounds of Xifaxan, or a 2-week round of Xifaxan, and they're great, and things go back to normal. But there's a very, very high relapse rate with something like 80% of the people will relapse within 3 months or something like that. I don't even remember the details, but it's something along those lines. So you really haven't fixed the problem, have you? If it comes right back.
No.
That's where the motility comes in. So we want to stimulate motility. We want to decrease stress. And we want to, ensure some good bile flow. And SIBO is a very complicated condition to treat, and there are many, many facets to it. But just to give you an idea, in conventional medicine, they want to kill it, and they may follow it up with a motility agent, something to make sure that your intestines continue to move so that nothing can grow back in there. Alternative medicine, naturopathic medicine, functional medicine, this may take a bit of a different approach. They may still use the model of using herbs to kill off some of the overgrowth, but we usually tend to take it a bit farther and ensure all of those other things. Like motility, I'll often give my patients motility exercises to stimulate either the vagus nerve, which is going from the brain down into the whole digestive tract, making everything move and continue to function properly. I will have them on usually something for stress, if that's involved, some herbs, adaptogenic herbs or something like that. And then I almost always give them something for bile flow, because bile is bacteriostatic. So as your gallbladder, so your liver makes bile, it's stored in your gallbladder. And when fat coming in from what you eat hits the small intestine and your body recognizes there's fat there, it squirts the bile into the small intestine to help emulsify that. But what nobody really talks about is that it also kind of clings the bacteria to itself and pulls that bacteria downward into the colon where it belongs. And so I always ensure that we have that liver, bile, gallbladder supported.
Make sure everybody's happy. I love that, because I remember my diagnosis and coming home with like this countertop full of large pills. And I remember saying to you, like, what is all this stuff? Like, you know me and swallowing pills. I don't like it. And they, I wasn't given antibiotics. I was given supplements. But, now I understand the complexity of why, and each one served its purpose. And then you even recommended some adrenal support and some other things that I quickly ordered because it does put your body under a lot of stress. We always think of stress as something stressful that happens, but physical stress. This was real, live physical stress on my body. So it was a really interesting experience. So, are there some things that people can do to prevent SIBO?
Well, I like to create a healthy environment in the gut, because if you have a good, healthy, solid, robust, diverse microbiome, you're going to be able to withstand any attacks that come in. I mean, we are exposed to so much more than people realize. And prior to COVID, if you went to a salad bar, you could pick up some H. pylori, some E. coli, you don't know what's in that food, but it's in there. If you have a good microbiome, your gut can handle it. If you don't, then you're probably going to get affected. So I like to think of the gut as a garden, where first, if you're planting a new garden, the first thing needs, right? So we might run a stool panel and see if there are any pathogens, anybody living in there that we don't want. I find them all the time. And do some weeding out. And then you want to plant with some probiotics. You want to feed with some prebiotics, right? That's like your fertilizer. You want to get those good strains flourishing in the gut. You kind of have to be careful with SIBO, what you're doing. Because if you have an overgrowth, there is potential that if you feed good bacteria, it will promote overgrowth in the small intestine. But if you can get the motility flowing and you can get the gut conditioned, then that's the best thing that you can do to prepare against SIBO. Also, keeping active, keeping you can't control what life does to you in terms of stress, but you can support your stress mechanism that your body was designed with. So I will give people adaptogenic herbs for that, or maybe phosphatidylserine, different formulas depending on the person. There's also something I like to recommend, which is deep breathing. Deep abdominal breathing is really good. There's actually been some clinical research on this, that it helps a lot of GI issues. When you're doing deep abdominal breathing, your chest remains relatively stable. And when you inhale, you allow the abdomen to expand out, and then you slowly exhale. And I like to have people force a little bit of the exhale out at the end, so you're really clearing out your lungs. And do that for about 10 times. And it does a couple of things. So it will put your body into rest and digest mode. We've all heard of fight or flight, which is the sympathetic nervous system. And then the other side of that is rest and digest, which is the parasympathetic. So this will help the parasympathetic. It will help what we call vagal tone, how well that vagus nerve is doing its job. And it takes a little bit of time, a couple weeks of consistently doing some deep breathing, but that has proven beneficial even for things like reflux. So, what else what else were you asking about?
Yeah, no, I think, you touched on that. We were talking about prevention and all these things that you can do to prevent. But I do see a question that came up, and I get asked this question all the time too. What's the connection between SIBO and leaky gut?
Yuck.
The 101 version, right?
It is not fun. So when you have SIBO, you're going to have a lot of inflammation in the gut. And leaky gut isn't quite what we think it is. This is an oversimplification. So you don't want to take this super literally. And there are also several types of leaky gut. So the medical term for leaky gut is intestinal permeability. And I'm going to try and give you a visual. If you have an intestinal cell here and an intestinal cell here, and they should be really close together. But then some inflammation comes in and you get a little bit of a spread. It's not this literal, okay? Your intestines are not literally falling apart and spreading apart like that, like we imagine. But imagine that they are, just to give you an idea. Now, as the food is flowing through your intestines, and you have all of these cells in here deciding if there's a good, if it's good food and we can let it pass through, or if there's a pathogen or some kind of an invader or something like that, the system will flag it and say, hey, we got a bad guy, and it'll send it outside the gut into the bloodstream. And now the immune system is tagging it as, oh, red flags, we've been invaded. What do we do? Everybody goes crazy. That's a very simplified piece of the connection between SIBO and leaky gut. But they really, they get pretty tangled up there.
Is it fair to say that SIBO is one of the causes of leaky gut?
I would say there's a big connection there.
Okay, so that's how I understand it as well.
So for instance, if we have established that there's leaky gut or intestinal permeability, it would make no sense to go through all the supplements and everything that you would use to heal up a leaky gut if you still have SIBO. You have to deal with the SIBO first, reduce the inflammation, then you have a chance at addressing the leaky gut. If it's a simple kind of leaky gut. I mean, there are some where, the whole cell itself has been damaged, and that's more of a, lifelong maintenance, supporting the gut lifelong. But some leaky gut can heal up relatively quickly. Once they remove all of the factors contributing to it.
So if people have SIBO as a diagnosis, likely have leaky gut, they go through and they do the treatment for SIBO, because you've said it doesn't just go away, right? It's kind of an ongoing thing. So how do they know when to really shift and focus to treat the leaky gut piece? Or, do they have to retest to know if the SIBO is gone, or address that part, if you will?
So conventionally, they would retest with the breath test. And if the breath test comes back negative and there's no more indication of overgrowth in the small intestine, if you have a good doctor, they will put you on a motility agent or what's called a prokinetic. That doesn't even address the leaky gut. I don't think that in conventional medicine, the gastroenterologists really address it. That I don't know. But what we do is, if this is a patient who has come in with breath tests and we do happen to get a negative after we treat, I usually use stool testing or microbiome testing, because I want to see what else is going on in there. It's never just SIBO. It's just, that's the big myth, is that, it's not like that kind of primary diagnosis, like a strep throat or something. It's usually very tangled up with other dysfunction that's going on in the gut. And for several reasons, you can't put your finger on it sometimes. But then that's when I will go in with more, where I have certain things that I use. I'm sure you do too. Butyrate is a big one right now that is being used. Many of us have depleted our butyrate producers, or our short chain fatty acid producers. So when we're talking about microbiome, we're talking about all the hundreds of species that are living in us, in our gut. And certain classes of these species take the plant-based fibers from our diet and convert them into short-chain fatty acids. Those short-chain fatty acids then go back and heal the colon, and they also help put us into fat burning mode. Well, if we don't have those species in an abundance, if their populations are very, very low or small, then we are not effectively converting these plant fibers into short-chain fatty acids. And often people who are going through SIBO have either been told to eliminate certain foods or food groups, like fiber and starch and sugar, and, all of these things.
Low FODMAP, yes, low FODMAP.
Yes, low FODMAPs, because they contribute to bloating. But the problem is that when we start starving out the bacteria that eat those foods, we then have trouble digesting those foods. So even when we fix all these things in the gut, we get rid of the SIBO, we work on healing the leaky gut, you still have to incorporate those foods back in so you can feed those species that will convert to your short chain fatty acids like butyrate. Sometimes we don't want to wait that long, and so we'll give the patient butyrate. So your gut bacteria can make the butyrate, or we may temporarily give you some butyrate just to help you along a little bit. 20 years ago, we could give someone glutamine and that would heal a leaky gut. These days, it's just not like that. I think our guts have been so assaulted by our food supply and pesticides and chemicals and whatnot that we just don't heal as easily as we used to.
So unfortunate. And you and I were talking yesterday, and one of the things that I had tremendous response from, and you had some great feedback on this, related to the butyrate, was the fact that I was now taking a pre, pro, and a postbiotic, which therein lies obviously the connection to the butyrate. And it was like a night and day difference for me personally. It was like, whoa, what just happened here when I added the postbiotic? And you explained that so well, and just hearing you talk about that now and really just how relevant that is.
Right. Well, most people have heard of probiotics. The prebiotics, just to give your audience a little information, the prebiotics feed your gut bacteria, because when you're taking probiotics, they don't typically seed and start growing in your gut, right? They will cause a positive effect in the gut. But what you ultimately want to do is feed your own garden, feed your own microbiome, so you can grow enough bifido to digest your food, and you can grow enough lactobacillus, and you can grow enough of your own mix of gut bacteria. That's our ultimate goal. So unless we're putting the prebiotics in, either through foods or supplements, you hit a plateau. And then the postbiotics come in, where the postbiotic is the thing that your gut bacteria has created. So gut bacteria will create, B vitamins. It creates all kinds of things that we don't really associate with our gut flora. But butyrate is one, acetate, propionate. Those are made by our gut. And so when we're referring to postbiotics, those are some of the things that we're referring to. And when you take them, it's like an instant, boost toward better feeling gut.
Yeah, I was like, because I'd never taken the postbiotic before. I'd had prebiotic, probiotic, plenty of them. And all of a sudden I'm taking this supplement that has all three in one. And for a few days, I felt a little bit strange, like my symptoms almost got a little worse. And then about a week later, it was like, whoa, what just happened here? In a good way, in a really good way. And so I've, obviously I've done a lot of educating around that as well too, but it's so reaffirming to hear that from you as a doctor, that there is a lot of importance behind the post part, just as much. I always explain it as 3 parts to a triangle, right? You don't want just like the tip, you want the other 2 pieces of the triangle as well. And when you have the complete triangle, beautiful things happen. That's how I would
Right.
explain it. So, well, this has been so valuable. I absolutely love having this conversation with you. Is there anything you feel that everybody should know that we have not talked about today?
Oh gosh, I don't know.
Well,
I
that
don't
means you've probably done a good job. And I know this is a big topic, right? So you can't take
huge.
all of it and say, okay, in 30 minutes, we're going to tell you everything you need to know about SIBO. But
Exactly.
I think people hopefully understand what it is, that it's not an infection. It's not like something went wrong, right? I mean, it went wrong, but sometimes these things develop over time. Maybe it's stress caused. In my case, it's probably related to Epstein-Barr. Could be a lot of things, right? You gave us some really good tangible things to try to prevent it. We talked about how to test for it. I think we covered a lot in 35 minutes. Would you agree?
Oh yes, and I mean, we could do a day seminar on it. There's so
Yes.
much, and there are so many voices around SIBO and all of the information. So this is literally like the tip of the iceberg.
Yes, and I see somebody is asking, are there any books that you'd recommend that people could read on SIBO?
I have no idea.
There
are.
a book of knowledge. So I guess that leads me to my final question. If obviously you're an expert in this area, and I know that you like to really focus on keeping people well as it relates to this area. If people would like to connect with you, where can they find you?
So I have so many websites, but the SIBO website is endsibo.com, endsibo.com. But my capacity to take on new SIBO patients is quite limited. I have another website, which is thehealthdimension.com. And that's my main website where you can book appointments. And the way I'm addressing my SIBO cases is with a full workup and, looking at all aspects of gut health, because I think it's really important not to compartmentalize. When we look at just the small intestine, we are missing everything that happens above it and below it. And it's all one big long tube from your mouth all the way down and out. So that's really the approach that I'm taking at this point.
Perfect. So I'll get those websites for everybody that's watching, and we'll make sure that we link them in the comments. And I am just fortunate that I got to meet Dr. Lisa. It's probably been, I don't know, a year maybe now, through a project that we worked on together. And I have learned so much from her. She is a wealth of knowledge. And I want to thank you so much for spending this 38 minutes with me and really going through this horrible yet fixable thing that a lot of people don't even realize they may have. So I thank you so much for your time. Thank you everybody for watching, and we'll be back at you live with who knows what. Some good information related to improving your health. You guys have a great day, and thanks again for watching. Take care.